Good day and welcome to today's lecture. What we're going to be doing over the space of the next 25 minutes or so is talking a little bit about the transform tool in Adobe Illustrator, and as well as talking a little bit about some appearance options. The assignment that you're going to have today is to create an image that has dynamics and depth in it. And depth is easy, it's 3D, and we'll talk a little bit about shadows and things we can do there. And we'll talk to you about how I created this particular artwork. This is not an original piece of artwork. This is something that I saw in a museum, and you really liked it and snapped a shot with my camera phone way back when. Okay? I'd show you the original picture, but I don't really know where it went. It was on the camera phone. That was like 3 phones ago. Okay. But anyway, so it was one of those things that that I just remember liking and pretty much emulated it. So this is not an original idea at all.
So before we get started, you're going to see some stuff you've already seen. There's a piece I'm going to cover here just in a few minutes about doing the rotation, and you already saw that in assignment number 6 in the symbols. But we're going to combine with it some of the transform effects tools that you saw with the pattern building. And so hopefully some of this will look familiar, but there will be new things, because there's always something new and shiny.
What I have here is just a small little shape that I made, and what I want to do is I like to spin it around, create almost like a Japanese rising sun, but not really, something that is a little more dynamic, shape driven. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, I would just simply make copies of it and spin it around. And in Illustrator, if you did it by hand, you could click on the rotate tool and center somewhere out here. This is what I did is I left clicked to center anchor points, and that's what that's for. And then I could simply just click and rotate, and I could move this anywhere I wanted to, and I could make copies of it. In fact, what I could do is I could actually alt drag out copies. Oops, I accidentally forgot to set my, there you go, set a center point, holding down the alt key and do a drag, and that way I can get multiple copies. And if I were to keep doing that, pressing down a centering here and then holding down the alt key and then dragging, I could spin it around, so 360 degrees. But that is very, well, unscientific to start with, and unless you got a really good hand and are really good at angles, you'll get to the end and you'll find that your pieces won't all line up. So is there a tool that will clone stuff around a circle? And the answer is no. No, there's not a clone tool that is in existence in Illustrator. Well, there is. There is the ability to make a transform and duplicate that transform. So like if I were to make one transformation, such as like this, I'd take my rotation, and I already have it set, and I press the set the rotation right about there, and press the Alt key, and then make that rotation up, then that gives me a duplication. And then if I were to just press Control D, what it'll do is it will take and it will duplicate that transformation each time I do that. That is holding down the Control D, or on a Mac it's Command D. And the problem that you run into though is at the very end, unless you're really good at angles, especially with rotations, yeah, you're going to overlap. And that's going to be, well, not quite so good. And you could do trial and error until the cows go home. But there is, again, an older school tool that will let us accomplish the same thing, where we can visually see what we're looking at. And that's found underneath the Effect, and it's Distort, and it's Transform. Now, what the Transform tool gives you is the option to scale, move, and rotate all in one, and dictate the number of copies that you're going to make. So here's my thought. Going to do a little bit of math. There is in a circle 360 degrees, and if I want to make this to be like a fin or a fan or something like that, if I would like there to be 10 of them, then each angle would be rotated at 36 degrees, and I would say that I would like 9 copies, the original one plus 9 more. Now if I were to just do that and type in I'd like each one to move 36 degrees and 9 more copies, how do you tell what's going on? Well, you click a little preview button right there, and it'll do that for you. Now, right now, it's just kind of all throw those on top of each other, and it ends up looking like, I don't know, almost like a maple leaf. Well, only because it's red. But you can interactively move those items. And the awesome thing about the transform tool is you can see where they're all moving to. And if you if you click and you got up to 100 points to move, but you're not stuck on 100 points, you actually can type in more there. So let's say if I wanted to type in 120, I could type in 120. Sure, you have to click somewhere else to update that, but it allows you to see it. You can also play around with your vertical movement. So if you want to create something that is all separated, you have that option to do so. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about this is if you change your mind, like let's say you're thinking to yourself, okay, I didn't want 10, I want 12. And 12 goes into 360 degrees 30 times. You can use a calculator if you don't have the math. That means I would need the original plus 11 more copies. And as soon as you do that, it automatically updates for you. And as long as that preview is going, you don't even have to think about something anymore. And like if I were to think, okay, let's see, I kind of set it, so that's kind of cool. I like that. But you might also be able to, well, control the distance apart because you're thinking, no, that's too far apart. So maybe I'll put this back down. Remember, it maxes out at 100. And I'm thinking, no, that's a little too tight together. I play around with my vertical movement and I'm thinking, that's okay vertical, but I don't want them touching. So maybe I might come up here to the horizontal. Let's try 102. And then I don't hit the enter key. Do not hit the enter key. You're thinking to yourself, I type 2 and I hit enter. If you hit enter, it's going to say OK. And if you say OK, you've made a transformation, and then you're stuck. All right. But if you hit the tab key, it accepts that value. And you could say, 102 is not bad. Let's try 103. Hit the tab key, and little by little, you can interactively adjust what that shape is going to look like. So you really have massive control over the dynamics. So you've got all your settings mint how you like them, and you're thinking, well, okay, I'm done. So now you go ahead and click OK. But all of a sudden you realize, oh, you wanted them spaced just a little farther apart. Well, what you do is you'll notice that when I close that window down, I actually opened up my Appearance tab. And if you can see on my Appearance tab, I got the little transform button there. So as long as you go back and select that piece, I'm going to deselect here and to come back and through, and I try, and no matter what I select, if I were to notice, if I click at the top, what it's doing is it's only selecting the main root shape. Why? Because the reason that you've got a dozen fans showing up there, fins, sorry, is that, well, they're a transform on this shape. So if I click back on that shape, I can get back into its appearance, and I could turn back on preview, and if I wanted to, I could go through and I could readjust it some more. And I could play around all I want because nothing's going to be permanent here. All you pretty much have to do is just make sure that if you want to get back into the transform window, you have to make sure that your fin is selected. And remember, if you come in here and you try and select one of the other ones, it won't let you do it. Now, if there's ever a point where you're thinking to yourself, hey, I do want to select the rest of them, if you go to this design and you do Object Expand Appearance, what it will then do is it will turn off the transform and will convert all of those individual fins into vector tools that then you could play around with if you wanted to do something else with. But again, as soon as you do that, you don't have the transform option anymore. So that would be something like in Photoshop flattening at the very end. So I would not make a suggestion that you do that unless you're absolutely sure that you don't need to transform that anymore.
Then you can do an ungroup like I just did and add a little bit of chaos to your artwork.
Okay, so let's look at something else that we can do with the transform window. What I have here is a small little shape that I created, and it's just a simple little ribbon. And if I were to look at the edges, in fact, let me zoom in on it so you can see a little bit better. If I were to look at my points along the edges, you'll see that I have them pretty parallel in both cases, and get a nice little shape. And it's not something that you remember you have to follow. It's more of a guideline. But I'm thinking what I'd like to do is I turn my flower or fan, I turned it yellow, thinking to yourself, this could be like the sun, and this could be like something flying into the sun, or, I don't know, flying into the black hole of Calcutta, except for that it's yellow. Anyway, so I could use the transform tool by going to the effect and distort and transform again. But this time what I would do is I would use it to maybe put a sequence of items. And I can go ahead, and it's selected with the direct selection tool, but it doesn't matter which tool that you select it with, it still will work. I'm going to go ahead and I say, like, maybe I want 6 copies total, so I want 5 more copies, and I'll turn on preview. And what I want to do is move those copies, and I can click the ability to play with the vertical and the horizontal shift, and I could have them kind of all heading toward the center of the flower. Now the interesting thing is I can also turn down the scale. So as they're getting farther away, I could make them so that the shape changes kind of radically. And I could alter the scale so that they don't really maintain the same shape. Or I could simply set them so that they're both, like, let's say I put a size in here of 70 and 70, so that they maintain the exact same aspect ratio, but they're just simply moving farther away. And remember, it maxes out at 100, but you're thinking to yourself, well, I want it to get a little bit farther. And then that. But I'm thinking, actually, I don't really have to, because if I'm going to go kind of for the center of that, I would pretty much stop right about there, so I wouldn't have to type any value in. But if you notice that when I was changing around, that little curly Q, like right there, kind of generated kind of a rope shape. It could do anything that you could repeat, which is awesome, and it's great for any sort of repeating. It doesn't have to be curly like this at all. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I like that. I'm pretty good, and I'm going to say OK. And at this point, you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe I want to add a little more randomness. Well, you can, with that item highlighted, go Object, Expand Appearance, and so now they're all separate. And when they're all separate, what I do is I have the ability to simply right-click and ungroup them, because when you expand the appearance, they're going to get grouped. And I could add some randomness to this. I could pull this piece up and this piece down, and maybe this piece a little bit over, and even kind of separate these items getting closer to each other. So you got the ability to generate clones of something, and I could even go back to the original one, hold down the Alt drag, and get another copy and kind of move that out like yay so.
So I've got the ability to kind of make this thing look like it's kind of a flowing kind of river or something along a path, something to give it some, well, depth.
Okay, so at this point I decided to dump the colors because I'm trying to emulate something that I actually saw at a museum at one time. So what I have here is my little shapes kind of all heading toward the center. I took, and after I expanded them, I actually moved them, moved a whole bunch so that they're sitting out, and I gave them slightly different colors. The idea here is that we're trying to show depth and dynamics, and the best way to show dynamics is making sure you have a multitude of different colors. Now, the best way to show depth, especially if something that looks Illustrator-wise, is to get rid of the flatness, because Illustrator designs tend to look really flat. Okay, so the easiest way to do that is to go into the Appearance tab and just pull it off the background. And you pull it off the background by faking a light and adding in a shadow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this Appearance here, and I'm going to click my FX tab. And you won't see the entire FX tab, but you have all of the filters that are there. Now they're also available up here under the effects, and I'll pull them off there because they're a little bit easier. So the first batch is the Illustrator effects. These are the effects that are not rasterized. They'll maintain a vectorized look. Some of them actually are rasterized, sorry, but they can be maintained by applied to vector graphics, which means you can still alter the graphics around. A lot of the Photoshop effects, as soon as you apply them, they will automatically rasterize your item. So where I want to go up here is underneath my Stylize, and underneath Stylize is probably the age-old tool of the best way to separate a foreground and a background and give something some depth, and that's adding a drop shadow. I'm going to click Add the Drop Shadow right there. And by default, this is the one that's going to be kind of darker, a little farther away. And when I was playing around with this earlier, I think I gave it a value of 7. And I'm just going to go ahead and keep the opacity and the blending mode of multiply and the color, and I'm just going to hit preview, see if I like it. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe a little bit farther, go with like an 8, and I'm thinking that's pretty far off. I'm good, and I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. So so you're thinking that you have a lot of other items. In fact, 6 more. And so do you have to apply the drop shadow to each one? The answer is no, you don't. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to make a graphic style. Now what a graphic style is if I were to click this item and drag it into the graphic style window, what it will do is it will copy the styles from that particular item. Now I only have one style attached to it, and that style that I attached to it is the drop shadow. So pretty much to apply a drop shadow to everything else, all I have to do is simply click and then click on the graphic style. I just simply click on the item, click on the graphic style, click on the item, click on the graphic style, and that is the quickest way to add items. In fact, if you were to shift click all of your items and then click the graphic style, boom, they'll all get shadows attached to them. And that is the easiest way to add shadows, because otherwise what you're doing is that each time you're going to have to click on an item, and then you're going to go to the effect, and you have to go to the stylize, and over to drop shadow, the window pops up, and blah 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 blah. Okay, so using a graphic style, anytime you have to repeat something, it's almost a no-brainer. Now, I am going to do some shifting here, because I'm thinking to myself, as these little pieces get a little closer, they're probably not going to be as far away. So I'm thinking that the items that are going to be farther away are going to have more depth, which means they're going to have a bigger shadow. Can I go in here and can I still edit the shadows? Yeah, it's the Appearance tab. And if you go in the Appearance tab and you open up the Shadow tool, you get exactly what you would have got before. And so I'm thinking that on these pieces that are back a little bit farther, that's going to be 9. These pieces I'll go ahead, and they were all at 8. We'll keep those. But that one right there, I'm going to open up its drop shadow. That's not going to be 8. I'm going to drop that to 6. And that's just tightening up the shadow to make it look like it's not quite so far away from the ground. When you're talking about dynamics, changing elements of your image over the course of your image is a key piece of making something look like it's well, either in motion or look like it's altering the depth. And in my case here, by simply just clicking on an item, opening up the drop shadow, and simply changing, that's all I wanted to do. Now, you also may want to change where an element's sitting in terms of the arrangement. I might think to myself, okay, so I've got this piece here in the middle that I just selected, but you notice the tail end of this lighter piece is on top of it. So I'm thinking, well, I want to change that. Holding the Control key and hitting the right bracket and left bracket will change where an item is arranged. It's like bringing it forward and sending it back. Holding the Control key down, hitting the right bracket and left bracket. And so I can control where that goes.
It's all about trying to get that flow going toward the center. Okay, so I'm going to add a circle in here.
Click on the ellipse and simply do a constrained draw and create something like that.
Well, first of all, it's just dull, boring, and gray. I can go slap on a little gradient in there, go into my swatches, slap on a gradient, but that doesn't look right either because that's a linear gradient. And I'm thinking to myself, this is round. I need to make it kind of a round-looking gradient. So what can I do? Well, it's already selected, so I'm just going to go over into my gradient tab, open that up. It's smaller, so I got to double-click on it to expand it. Oh, collapsed itself, and boom, there you go. And choose a radial gradient.
Then we select away from that and see if I like that. Yep, like that a lot better because it gives me a nice little 3D look. But again, I've already been using shadows, so I definitely have to apply shadows again. So I click on this, and I have my graphic styles that already had the shadows, and so I click on it. But you're thinking to yourself, whoa, how come the graphic style went away? Well, this had a gradient in it, and that gradient was already a style. So if I actually want to add a drop shadow to this puppy, I have to actually just go up to the effect and stylize and drop shadow and just do it that way. All right, now this is going to be quite a bit farther away, so I think what I'll do is I'm going to offset both of these. Let's try about 15 on each one, and that's not even going to be near enough what I want. Let's go for a 35 on each one, and that's pretty good. And I'm going to throw in quite a bit bigger blur. It's amazing how you have some sliders and other places you don't. So I'm going to blur this out probably about 15, 12, yeah, because I want it to be so it's sitting far enough off so that it gives it a lot of depth. That's the whole point of this assignment, depth of dynamics. Anyway, and I was playing around. 10 I think is going to be a good number for me. Okay, so I can click that, and my opacity is pretty good, and I just say, okay, good. And I'm thinking I want to add a few more planets. So I'm going to just do an alt drag and drag that puppy out, and we'll make like a smaller one here. And the problem with the smaller one is that, yeah, that shadow is way too far away for something that's small. So I do have to go into my Appearance tab, double click on my drop shadow, and I'll probably maybe turn this back to, let's try 25 to see what it looks like. Let's click on preview, Nope, let's try even lower. Let's go 15. And I actually thinking to myself, maybe this one needs to be, maybe this one needs to head a little farther in. So I think I'm going to change the offset on the X a little bit, and I'll just click, there we go. So I'll get it kind of at a slightly different angle. And just wanted to push it just a little bit, and then I'll take this and I'll do an alt drag, and we'll put a one down here. This one's going to be, we'll make this one really large, and this one will be one where I think what I'll do is I'll change the hotspot on it, because I want the hotspot to alter a little bit. So here I think what I'll do is I'll grab this small little item here and spin the hotspot. So it is, no, it's a little bit too much. So it's yield right about there. And I think what I'll do with the shadow is kind of rotate the shadow just a little bit. And you don't really rotate the shadow. What I'm just going to do is I'm just going to change my offset so that the X and Y are two different offsets. And if I were to set this to say like 5, and I've got to make sure I turn on preview, then you'll see that that it's kind of, you know, just a radical shift. So I'm going to put this back to a 35, and I think I'll drop the Y so that it actually is maybe about 15. And that's pretty good. I'll take that. And I'm thinking I'll make my ball just a little bit bigger. And so I come in here to the selection tool, holding down the shift key, and I can just enlarge that just a little bit more so. And I'm going to have it hang off the edge because I'm going to crop this puppy out. And I think I'll pull that out just a little bit more there. Okay, so the whole point of this project is that you're trying to create some dynamics and some depth into something. What you do and how you create it is completely up to you. I'm not quite sure if I like that ball the way it is there, but pretty much this would be it. If you wanted to crop your image down, or if you wanted to leave it how it was, cool. I would probably maybe in my background, I could probably take that background out. I put a little gradient on it when I first put it in there, and I'm thinking to myself, it's a little too clean. It's vector, so maybe I'm thinking I'll add, well, I could come in and add a Photoshop effect to it. A little bit of noise could be okay. And I'm thinking where would be noise in here, and stylized glowing texture. There we go. So I could add maybe texturizer if I wanted to. You know, something kind of up to me.
Okay, so I actually paused this and added a little bit more shadows. Why? I really wanted to show a little bit more depth, and the idea behind this assignment is that you're showing depth. So it's always better to err on the side of more. More is better. You can think of it as like this could be the one opportunity in life where supersizing is okay, as opposed to other kind of supersizing, which is not okay. Anyway, back to this. So I added a lot more shadows, a lot more depth, because I wanted it to illustrate depth. That's what the assignment is. So about the only thing that I probably don't have is I didn't really put any depth on the small little design that had in the background. I could have, if I wanted to, maybe had that sitting against a kind of different background, maybe add a little bit of shadow there, or I could have, if I wanted to, added in maybe even a 3D object. Oh, when did we do that? A couple weeks ago. Seriously. Okay? So, what am I going to do? What's left? Well, really the only thing left is to export and save, but if you'll notice, I actually did some I moved some pieces that are partway on and partway off. I'm bleeding off the edge of this, and I specifically did that with a ball and a little bit of this kind of fin fan kind of thing going on there. And this is where you could actually use the Artboard tool right underneath the spray bottle. I'm going to click on the Artboard tool. You could use the Artboard tool to actually do a little bit more work. There's not really a cropping tool in Illustrator if you're used to using cropping tools like in InDesign or Photoshop, but you can alter the artboard size after the fact. Let's say if I wanted to cut things off a little bit more, I could narrow this up just a little bit. I could pull in the edges that maybe I didn't want. Be careful about accidentally drawing a second artboard right there. I wasn't on this selection, so I ended up drawing a second artboard. Yes, how many artboards can you have? As many as you want. I could have had an artboard just for each one of these little planet kind of things. But every time you draw an artboard, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and zap those off, because I'm just really using the one. And my point here is that I can use this artboard as a little bit of a cropping tool. So I could crop this just a little bit tighter, which is as opposed to grabbing an element and moving things around. You know, that could be also a possibility, but just altering the artboard can give you a little bit of cropping. You can use that to widen it out or narrow it down, depends upon the elements that you put on there. And that's a little bit easier than simply making a selection of an entire section. I'm using like 3 different layers here, making a selection and altering the entire thing. Yeah. Okay, so cropping artboards. Well, what do? I alter the artboard. Oh, okay. So whenever you alter an artboard, using the Artboard tool, just click on the arrow, and that gets you back to where the artboards are, but you don't really see what that looks like. Well, way back at the beginning of the lecture, you saw me actually open up the Navigator window. You maybe didn't know that I was opening up the Navigator window, but the Navigator window, when it originally opens up, is really, really tiny. In fact, it usually opens up by default with an info window, and sometimes it sits over in the corner, if it's even open up. The cool thing about the Navigator window is that if you expand its size, so you make it so that it's a larger window, and if you're fitting on a double screen monitor, this is a great way to use the Navigator window. You can see exactly what your crop looks like. So you get a general idea that if you happen to edit your artboards, you can see what is happening by just simply having the Navigator window open, having it in a whole different spot. It's a lot easier than guessing by, okay, if I go to, I could do the save for web thing, and not sure how that got really, really big, but here's the save for web thing. I could make sure that it's set on fit on screen there, and come in here and save my ping 24s, and yeah, sure, I can do that way. But if I have the Navigator window open, booyah, I don't gotta even worry about what the edges are. Or, you might just think to yourself, I can always tell where my edges are because I can see them. Well, not if you're dealing with some blackish, black background, because then there's a little bit of an issue about losing the artboard line. But I can click on the artboard. Okay, yeah, anyway. Well, pretty much that ends this lecture, though. Just talk a little bit about cropping at the end. The important thing here, as mentioned just a couple minutes ago, to always err on the side of more depth is better than less depth in this assignment. You want to have elements that actually pop out of the screen at you, because that's the whole point of this project. And have fun on your project.